What is the freakiest or creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? I had a roommate who was always a complete butthole. Never was polite or kind to anyone. One night after I helped his drunk butt to bed, he turned to me and said, "I really appreciate you, and I know you don't like seeing me like this. You've been a good roommate and friend, thank you." I found him dead the next morning due to an undiagnosed heart condition that alcohol had amplified. Not creepy or freaky in the normal sense, but I will never forget how serious and genuine he was in his last words spoken ever. It was the first time I had ever heard him compliment anyone. In 1991 I went to a 7-Eleven by myself when we were at my grandmother's house. There was another kid there, about my age. We looked similar. I bought a Slurpee and walked back to my grandma's house, and that was that. The other kid was kidnapped and murdered, pretty much right after leaving that 7-Eleven. The only thing I can think of that kept it from being me was maybe I won some sort of cosmic coin toss. The police are pretty sure they know who did it, but couldn't prove it, and to this day it still weirds me out. I'm 41 now and live in that neighborhood. I have a very vivid memory of waking up terrified in the middle of the night and running to my parents' room, because I saw a ghost when I was a kid. He followed me and stared at me from the doorway as I crawled into their bed and hid under the covers. We looked at each other for a few minutes and then he left. I was so shaken that I stayed awake the rest of the night until my parents woke up in the morning. I was an adult when I realized that it was not a ghost and actually someone scoping out our house in the middle of the night. I was about 10 and I had a huge fear of someone being in my house, to the point where I wouldn't go to the basement because it scared me. But I am glad I had that fear, because one day during the summer I was trying to go to sleep and I heard a noise from above me, and I freaked out. I then noticed over the coming days that my room was really hot, and I thought this was strange because we just got new air vents put in. My dad was checking them out and went to get some sort of tool, when I saw the scariest image possible. There was a skinny man looking at me and my dad from the vent in my ceiling. I froze and pretended not to notice him, and I went to get my dad, and me and my 10-year-old mind was instantly thinking, run with him out of the house. But I have 2 cats and we're scared to leave them, so I grabbed a paper towel and a pen and wrote in my chicken scratch handwriting, "There is a man in my vent," but he couldn't read it. And asked what it meant, and that's when we heard a thud, and he looked at it again and must have put it together, because he grabbed me and called the police. When my mom got home she got to see the man being dragged out of the house in cuffs. Even though he was caught and I still had a somewhat happy ending, the image of looking up and seeing his face, and being so petrified I couldn't move or scream still haunts me. I've told this story before, but it is still by far the creepiest thing to happen to me. When I was 16 I had just gotten my license as well as my first after-school job. Since school ended about an hour before I had to be at work, I would sometimes park in the adjacent parking lot and take a nap. This was a shopping strip with a grocery store, restaurants, and a bank on a fairly busy Friday afternoon. As I'm sitting there drifting off I see a black Denali pull up behind me blocking my car in the spot. A gentleman jumps out in a business suit and asks if I can help him. He looks nice enough, and I'm assuming he is looking for directions. He starts to explain to me that his wife and he were supposed to be signing for a loan at the bank behind us today, so that they can purchase a boat, but she is stuck in a meeting and can't make it. He then asks if I wouldn't mind posing as her and signing the documents for her. I'm completely blown away, but super shy and feel the need to let him down easy. Stupid, I know. So I tell him I don't think they'll believe I am your wife. He then tells me it's fine, he has her license with him, which he shows me, and she has the same hair and eye color as me, so they won't know. At this point I'm freaking out. I start to notice how disheveled he looks, he's sweating, and surprise surprise, no wedding ring. I just want him away from my car, so I start telling him I can't help him, that he needs to go ask someone else. He says it's fine, it'll be quick, just jump in my truck and I'll take you over there. Like I said, this bank was in the same shopping strip. There would be no need to drive to it. Even in my gullible teenage mind I know this story is complete bull. I'm telling him no over and over, while scanning the parking lot for anyone who might be noticing, but of course no one has. He then starts getting irritated, telling me that I'm perfect and the only one who can do it, how beautiful I am, can he at least take me to dinner, and so on. I start trying to close my window and he reaches through, grabs my shoulder and starts trying the door handle, which was luckily locked. I'm so frozen I don't even really react. I can't go anywhere as he's blocking me in. Suddenly, and I'm not really sure why, I just blurt out that I'm only 16. And for some reason that freaks him out. He slowly backs away, gets in his truck, and leaves. I called the police afterwards, but they never followed up with me. But I just know he had found that license and made up that story as a way to lure women into his truck, and it scared the hell out of me that he could have convinced someone before. Years later I spotted him on the sex offender registry for assault. I was alone in my house with my stepdad. I went to the bathroom. When I sat down on the toilet, that's when I saw someone was trying to open the door. I pushed it and said occupied, but whatever was at the other side kept trying to open the door. I called my stepdad and I heard him from the kitchen saying, "Yeah?" At that point I was terrified. It suddenly stopped. I checked the whole house for anyone other than my stepdad, didn't find anybody. I went to the other bathroom and then used it. Still don't know what the hell was at the other side of the... My cousin and I were probably targeted for a scam, but I still don't know how or why. We are 6 years apart, but went to the same high school at different times. Small school, graduating class is about 60. Years later, we are on a road trip together several states away, and decide to stop at a Huddle House for coffee. We walk in, and the guy at the next table turns around and smiles and says, "You went to Anytown High School, right?" When we say yes, he says he and his girlfriend, also at the table, smiling and not talking, went there too. We didn't recognize them, but smiled politely, commented it was a small world. He starts to rapidly talk about different things from the school, just disjointed comments that were a bit odd. He talked like a salesman, almost. At first, we smile and nod, but he had weird facts wrong. So we asked what year he graduated. He claimed not to remember. So we asked follow-up questions and he gets cagey. Suddenly the girlfriend goes, "This isn't working," and they suddenly pay and leave, food untouched. We since have determined they didn't go to our school, and have tried to figure out how he knew what he did, to no avail. When I was about 5 I was visiting my grandma in the city with my mom, dad and sister. We were walking towards the city center so it was pretty crowded. I remember letting go of my dad's hand and then feeling him grab back hold of it a few moments later. I kept walking, I don't know how far. I hear my dad shouting from behind me and grabbing my other arm. I hear him say sorry and I look up and I realize I was holding hands with an old man that I didn't know. My dad assumed that I'd accidentally grabbed onto this man's hand thinking he was my dad. I remember him pulling me away all embarrassed and I was just thinking, but the man grabbed my hand? So basically, I think some guy tried to snatch me out of a crowded area. I still don't understand why my dad thought I grabbed onto his hand. My parents were normally quite paranoid about strangers. He must have been distracted when talking to my grandma. I used to live in a 1-bedroom apartment with a den. In the den we had a spare bed for visitors or whatever. One night my boyfriend was super sick so I went and slept in the spare bed. In the middle of the night I had what seemed to be sleep paralysis, where I couldn't move but was seemingly awake. In that state I saw a dark figure walk into the room and just stand over me for a while. Like the dark figure was right over my face. The next day I was very freaked out. I told my boyfriend and he asked if I was joking. The same night he saw a dark shadowy figure in our bedroom, pacing in front of the bed. He said he slept with the light on all night, which had explained why it was on the next morning when I went into the room. This happened about a year ago and we haven't talked about it since. We'd rather forget that entire night happened. I was probably 9 years old, in about 1995. At that time all the schools and parents were warning us of stranger danger. It seemed like a lot of kids were getting kidnapped because they were being tricked into helping the kidnappers find a lost pet. One day I was riding my bike alone on our street, a fairly populated street, lots of kids out playing and whatnot, and a green 2-door car pulled up with a woman driving and a guy in the passenger seat. The guy calls out the window to me, "Hey kid, we lost our dog, can you help us find her?" I can still remember the feeling I felt. It was like sirens were going off, and I thought for a split second that this was it, I was going to be kidnapped. A rush of what felt like burning hot adrenaline through my body. I felt like I could hear everything 10x louder and see everything 10x better. I've never felt anything like that before. I hopped off my bike, pulled the front tire up so I could turn around faster, and I booked it home. I was shaking and tears were pouring down my face even though I wasn't crying. I got home and told my mom what happened. She called the police, but I'm not sure if the people were ever caught. Crazy. One evening, for some reason, I thought about a person that I had gone to college with but had not seen in more than 30 years. So I decided to Google her name to see what she had done with her life. I found her obituary. It had been posted earlier that day. If I had Googled her one day earlier I would never have known that she had died. When I was 14, I had just moved to another state. My bedroom was sparse. I didn't even have a bed frame, just a mattress on the floor. Next to my bed was an alarm clock that had big large red numbers on it. I laid down on my bed, put my head on my pillow and I looked toward my clock. The time was 10:24. I blinked, literally blinked. The clock said 10:24 but it was morning. Light was coming through the window. I swear I didn't sleep. I literally blinked and it was 12 hours later at the exact same time. I spent the rest of the day in a tired haze, like I had stayed up all night. All I know is I had just gone to bed and blinked and now it was morning. Every time I hear those conspiracy theory shows on the radio about time skips and wormholes and things, I always wonder if that's what happened to me. But it is by far the freakiest thing to happen to me. I was home alone, laying down on my living room floor, and hardcore spacing out at the ceiling. I heard my mother scream on my front porch. I rushed out, but she wasn't there. I ran around the outside of my house. Not a single person in sight. It 10,000% sounded like my mom, and it curdled my bones because it was so raw and animalistic in its sound. I called her right away. Mom picks up the phone and I ask her if she is alright. She responds that she is and tells me to hold on for a minute, while she pulls over into the parking lot of a business. She was driving and didn't want to talk on the phone at the same time. Seconds later, I hear a lot of noise and my mom screamed. An eternity stretches on before mom is calm enough to say anything coherent. She goes on to tell me how the car in front of her and the one behind her, before she pulled over, the ones that continued on the same path of travel that she had been on, had been struck by a speeding semi that ran a red light at the next intersection. It was a terrible accident with extensive injuries. The semi clipped the rear of the front vehicle and front of the rear vehicle. My mom's car would have been hit dead center. We always joke that we are psychic, as this is not the first instance like it that we have had, but it was definitely the most freaky of the bunch. I was very close to my grandfather. He was easily the best person in my life. He was an amazing man and went way out of his way to be supportive and connected. He wrote me letters all the time. We stayed at their house often. He encouraged my education and would send workbooks and novels for me. He had worked in education until he retired, a school district superintendent, and really believed in the importance of early childhood education and reading. He was very involved in my education and a very positive man. He died when I was 14 and I was devastated. It really changed a lot in my family dynamics. He had always been the head of the family. My dad, his son, was an alcoholic. I struggled with depression. It was a really hard time for me and I missed him greatly. I still do. When I was 25, my first child was born. We named her Raven, not a super common name here, Canadian. When she was about 4 or 5, I was browsing through the discard books at our local library and came across a book about a raven who thought she had ugly feathers and wanted beautiful feathers like all the other birds. The moral of the book being that we all have our own traits and abilities that makes us special and that through accepting ourselves and our own individuality we will have a much better life than if we try to be something we aren't. I thought it was a touching book and really seemed perfect for my daughter, Raven, so I bought it and took it home. When I went to read it to her later that day, I opened to the front cover and saw a sort of sticker on the inside cover. It said that this book had been donated to the city's library system, among several others, in my grandfather's name when he died. I dropped the book in shock and a chill ran up my spine, but there it was. His name, his date of death, a blurb about how important children's education had always been to him and how he believed our children are the future. He had left a sum of money in his will to our city's public library system to use to purchase books for the children's sections. I called my mom and told her about this. She was stunned. She knew that this had been a part of his will, but that was it. So, I happened to pick up a book at my local library, out of quite a few libraries. It's a big city, about a raven, my daughter's name, who learned to love herself for who she was, which had always been my grandfather's message to me, that had been donated by my grandfather's estate to the library system, 15 years previously, on the day that it was put out for sale as a used discard book. Bought it and had not found the plaque inside until I went to read it at home. It felt like a gift from him to me and my child. I can't even fathom the odds of that happening. I have never been a believer of the supernatural, and I don't believe my grandfather's ghost somehow arranged this, but it does seem to be a stretch to call it a coincidence. I like to believe that his spirit somehow still checks in on me, and my kids. I don't know how else to explain this. It still sends a chill up my spine. At the time I felt such a sense of love and comfort. I have missed my grandfather for many years now. My daughter is 14, the age I was when he died. She's long grown out of reading that story, but I keep it closed just the same. We moved into a new place, built around 1930, and sometime in the 70s had a fire. My 3-year-old, at the time, started running around the house and playing hide and seek with himself. Kids weren't allowed in our room, but our room was on the first floor and the closet was actually the underside of the stairs. He kept running in there and shouting, "Found you. Hide better." We didn't think much of it. New house. Kids have imaginary friends. Until that night when he asked if Sam could sleep in his room. He said she hide better. We didn't think much of it. New house. Kids have imaginary friends. Until that night when he asked if Sam could sleep in his room. He said she was lonely, but they're friends now so she can sleep with him. She doesn't want to sleep in the closet anymore. No one else ever saw her and weird things rarely happened. We moved a year later and except for the day after we moved, he asked if she can come too. He has never spoken of her again.